to the January 11th, 2022 budget meeting for the Southwest Vermont Union Elementary School District. So our first agenda item is to open the floor for public comments. So Superintendent Culkeen, are you able to see if we have anyone?
You do have public, but you could ask if they want to raise their hand. They don't seem to be raising their hand. So it doesn't look like you have anyone for public comment.
We'll give it just a few more moments. If you want to do public comment and you're joining us via Zoom, if you at least want to wave to the camera, if not actually raise your little hand, that makes sure we're not missing anybody. Okay, so I'm not seeing anyone raising either their virtual hand or their actual hand. So we will move on to our next agenda item, which is to review and approve the minutes from the December 14th meeting. So I would first ask, are there any proposed amendments or corrections to be made to those minutes? All right. Thank you, Dick. That's a first. Can I have a second on that, please?
Second.
Thank you, Scott. Any discussion on the motion on the floor? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the minutes as published, please signify by saying aye and raising your actual hand, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. But I'm driving, so I can't video.
Okay.
So you can't see my hand. It's up though. And I only have one of them, so right now.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, thank you for not doing video while you're driving, Shayla. So any opposed? Any abstentions? Very good. And the motion passes. So thank you. So that brings us to the third agenda item, which is our budget review. So for that, we will turn the floor over to Director Gordon.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? I don't think we've actually connected yet via voice in this room, so we can hear everybody just fine.
Gotcha.
Okay, great. Okay, so let us jump right in here. So the information is posted. Sorry. We do have some updates from the previous version, namely, really the assessments from for SVSU. But I'll quickly run through these here. So on the narrative. Oh my goodness! My computer is like having issues. I apologize. So on the narrative, we have any changes I've noted in blue italics, just to kind of highlight from the previous version. So we have had some updates just based on known staffing changes. So that's your salaries and benefit lines there. Another item to note that I had noted earlier, but we hadn't factored it in, was this intensive special needs specialist, adding that back in for the Learner Support Center at Molly. We did put that in based on this board seemed supportive of that at the first meeting. So I went ahead and put that back into the SVSU budget, and that has been approved. So you're not actually seeing it in the salaries and benefits line, but rather in the assessments, because our support staff gets directly assessed by district there. So it'll be in the assessments line.
Renee, I may have already asked this question 12 times, but I'm slow on pickup here. Some of this, a big part of this is as a result of recovery needs, isn't it?
All of the asks that you're seeing here for the position requests, Dick, is that your question?
Yes.
I wouldn't want to speculate as to why the administrators asked for what they did. I mean, I think based on the positions, you're seeing a lot of them are tied to social, emotional health and well-being of our students, whether it be the behavior interventionists, guidance counselors, social workers. So I would say yes, and we do have supports in place that we are funding through grants as well. but these are on top of those positions.
I understand that. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And if I'm going too fast, or somebody, if you want me to go through all of this again, I was planning on just kind of going through the changes from version 1, so we can actually kind of get into the nuts and bolts as to what this really is going to translate to for taxes, or at least estimates anyway. On the contracted services line, number 3, we've had just some minor adjustments there from some of our facilities managers in the contracted service update. And then I also was in contact with Sheriff Schmidt, and he has projected a rate increase for the 2 SROs in Pownell and Shaftesbury next year. So I did go ahead and factor that into the draft that you have before you as well. And actually, before I jump any further, I wanted to back up for just 1 second. I misspoke at our first budget meeting. I think Jeff had asked me a question about the art teacher in Woodford. So this line item here, Principal Basic had asked to increase her art position at Molly Stark from what's currently in the budget at a 0.8 to a 1.0. And Jeff asked me what was going to happen with the Woodford position, and I said he'd have to reach out to Principal Basic to ask her. That position at Woodford is split between Shaftesbury and Woodford, so there's no change planned there. This is actually just a request to increase the existing teaching position for art at Molly from a 0.8 to a 1.0. So that position would still remain fully at Molly Stark. The next update we had was in our operations. I had some updated information from Pownell for some of their projects, so I went ahead and factored that into the line there for operations. And then, of course, the biggest change that we're seeing is in the assessments, which is number 10. And the notation that I have in the narrative isn't all inclusive. It was just kind of highlights as to the major drivers of the increase that you're seeing. So it is that additional paraprofessional, or the intensive support, intensive special needs position there for the support center. At the SU level, we do have an additional ELL, or English language learner teacher. So there will be 2 full-time based on some need that we are forecasting for the coming year. Another add to the SU budget was for a special education administrator at On Point. And the rent for the central office relocation to downtown and associated utilities. And then, of course, the pre-K tuition, which increases annually, but we factored that into the SU budget. So those were just some of the biggest factors there.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we know what the rent is going to be at that new SU building?
Yes. Yes, the lease that we have in place is $128,000 a year. So about $10,000 a month. About $10,000 a month.
Okay.
I have a question as well, Renee. It's Jeff.
Uh-huh.
So who's been doing On Point now? Is that split between 2 different people?
It was previously kind of a very small portion of one administrator. In the budget, I think we were only carrying a 0.1 FTE, and we found that that's just not sufficient for that program. So, I mean, that's where we have it built in the budget is On Point, but because On Point is fully funded through the SVUESD, we could certainly, if Kate decided that there was need elsewhere, it could be reallocated. But that's where it's built for the FY23 budget anyway.
And also for the ELL teachers, you know, I know we're having a, you know, I mean, at least in some areas, there's a big mix of, you know, non-speaking English moving to parts of Vermont. Are we going to have a pretty versatile ELL teacher in place to, you know, meet those needs of those potential families? Or is it going to be like more, you know, Spanish speaking, or, you know, what are we looking at potentially?
I don't
We know it's.
speak to that at this point.
We'll play it by ear then. Okay, just asking.
Yeah, I mean, we have it in. I don't know if we've actually even posted it yet.
Oh.
Maybe it was posted as an anticipated opening, but since the budget has been approved, yeah, we will proceed.
We'll have to see who the applicants are.
Okay, thank you. Just curious.
So again, those are the highlights of the changes you're seeing. So overall, looking at 8.37% increase, or just over $2 million from the current budget. So typically what we look at then is our demand on the education fund, because that really tells us what our tax impact is going to be. So in the packet, what's been posted, you have the budget category with a narrative, and then behind that, the budget's broken out by function or department with an associated narrative. And then the second to last piece is the estimated revenue. So that's what I have up on the screen now, is the estimated revenue. For the forecasted move, we've removed the rent here. I don't know if there would be another possible use of this building, which could put money back in, but I took it out just as kind of a worst case scenario. Fund balance did increase, and I did not include any reduction to that fund balance just because of the sheer increase that we're seeing and what our demand on the ed fund is going to be. It is certainly up to the board if they would like to try to reduce some of that fund balance. We did have that ballot article pass, I believe it was last year, which enables the board to, on an annual basis, review the money that is in the fund balance and allocate a portion of that to a reserve fund. And the reserve fund was not identified with any specificity, but rather could be used at your discretion. So if we needed it for capital improvements, or we needed it for tax stabilization going forward. But as of right now, we have not put any money in that fund, and 2.8 million would be what would be available. But again, if we reduce this fund balance, this is going to increase, which would then increase the percentage as well. So
if you use a substantial part of the fund balance, the state support grant increases?
Right, because we're taking away offsetting revenue. So right now we're using all of our surplus, but if we pulled some of that surplus out to kind of set it aside, then we still need to have enough money coming in to generate or to cover the anticipated expenses that we have in the budget before you.
I guess where my brain goes is an 8% increase is not going to fly without applying some of our fund balances.
Right, and so that's why I didn't take the liberty of throwing that in here. I assumed that the board would probably want to use the full fund balance to offset the cost. So that is full here. So just to give you a rough idea of what we're looking at for taxes, you remember we have to start with equalized pupils, and we've only received one version of that from the agency so far. There has been some kind of chatter back and forth that some of the ADM, or the average daily membership numbers for some entities, didn't seem like they were quite correct. So I know that the agency was getting ready to do another data pull. We may see some revisions, but typically they aren't tremendous variations from what we have. But this is, again, the best and only information I have at this point in time. So the equalized pupils at the elementary level, and then of course we have to blend it with Mount Anthony, with that being our Union High School district. So we take the current status of the MAU budget, which has not been approved yet. They've only seen draft 1. And then we take the SVUESD budget, and that's, as you can see, the same for each member town. So our expenditures plus the offsetting revenue gives us the education spending, which is the same as this number right here, our general state support grant. And then we divide that by our equalized pupil. So for SVUESD, we know it's these 4 numbers combined, which gives us the 1276.10. And that gives us our education spending for equalized pupil. So that's the number that you actually see on the ballot article for the budget. Now, the next number here is the homestead property yield, and this is just the recommendation at this point. So the tax commissioner gave us the recommendation on December 1st. And at that time, it was noted that there's an anticipated surplus in the ed fund of $90 million. And with that, they gave us a scenario that if we were to use, or if the legislature decides to use that full surplus, this yield number could go as high as 13,846. So if that number goes up, it's getting closer to what our equalized spending or education spending for equalized pupil is. So that means the tax rate would end up coming down. However, I've erred on the side of a little bit of conservatism and put in their scenario B, that if the legislature does not apply that full surplus to the ed fund, this is the alternative that they provided. So that's the number that I've put before you. And essentially what this means in another way is that if our education spending, so right now you can see it's 18,238. If our education spending was 12,937, our base tax rate would be $1. But because we're spending more, our base tax rate, we divide that and it's coming up to $1.40, almost $1.41. So again, with the blended tax rate, we take this base rate from the SVUESD and along with that from MAU, and proportionately apply the percentages of equalized pupils from each district to these base rates. So I've tried to color code it to make it a little bit easier to follow. Bennington's numbers, Pownell, Shaftesbury, and Woodford. And then we get an equalized rate across the board, roughly about, $1.25 in most cases, almost a 1.3. And then we have to apply the CLA, that common level of appraisal. And as anticipated, with the surge we saw in property sales in Vermont, a lot of our CLAs have taken a serious decrease. This number is fixed and will not change. So the lower this number is, it drives our tax rates up. So these are set for next year. And applying the CLA to that equalized rate gives us an estimated tax rate for next year. Comparing to what it was for this year, even though we're looking at an over 8% increase, we're projecting small decreases in some cases. Woodford actually potential of a 10-cent decrease on the tax rate. So it's kind of, the range is wide because the CLA varies from, 85% in Bennington to almost 100% in Woodford. So that is why that's factoring so greatly.
Can you, I'm not so good at math here. The CLA directly affects our increase or decrease. Now in Woodford, our home values determine the CLA, and the CLA is up,
CLA is down,
down.
yes, from last year.
Hmm.
So when our CLAs are below 100%, it's saying that our properties are undervalued comparatively. So therefore, the grand list isn't large enough to support the taxes needing to be raised. So we have to divide by these percentages, which then you can see, you know, it was 1.259, but then becomes 1.2729 because the properties are slightly undervalued in Woodford, much more so in Bennington. That equalized rate is like 1.25, but then when you apply the CLA, because we're 15% below market in Bennington, that increases the tax rate to 1.47 to be able to raise enough or generate enough funding based on the grant list.
This is not I guess my thought has to do with what I hear from Woodford residents in that when the consolidation occurred, my explanation was, yeah, everybody's coming up in Woodford to meet the same tax burden as everybody else in the other districts, and then it will even out. I guess that's not going to happen because of other things that are going on. And this is not a comment on all your work here. This is just, I got to figure out.
Does that get-
live in 3 weeks?
Part of it too, Dick, for Woodford in particular, is if you look at the split between the elementary district and the high school district. So only almost 41% of your tax rate is coming from the SVUESD budget, but almost 60% of it is coming from MAU because of the equalized pupil split. And if you look back up here at Mount Anthony, they have a much lower cost for education spending per equalized pupil. So that's actually working in Woodford's favor as well.
Yep, I hear you. And I appreciate what you're doing. I just looking at the lifespan here.
So that in a nutshell kind of is all the information that I have for you this evening. I'm happy to answer questions. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is that rumor has it that Act 173, which is the law that shifts special education and special education funding, that is the only data that we have received from the agency because it is supposed to go into effect July 1. So we use that data to generate our offsetting revenue for our special education assessment. But the rumor is that the legislature will be taking up Act 173 again and possibly postponing it.
So we debated whether mentioning that to you tonight because we don't want to confuse or cloud the issue, but you should hear of it because we may need board members to scream loud and clear at the legislature that, you can't be changing something as significant as this at what really is the end of budget season. This isn't the beginning of the end of budget season. And like in any shift in policy or law, there's winners and losers, and there are districts that would probably receive less funding at that. I hope that's not the reason why the delay, but how can we plan a budget that involves significant spending and could be a shift of quite a large pound of money that would change everyone's assessments. So stand by. I mean, right now, that is the law, as Renee said, and we are going by what the law says, but we hear rumors. And I asked in a superintendent's meeting with Secretary of Education. I asked that question generated by Renee, and his answer was he will be testifying to the legislature at it, and that they are looking at it, but that was a little vague, which makes us nervous. So we'll be rallying you if something changes. You'll be hearing like, wait a minute, because what's our, we have to warn this, early in the 20th of January, no later than the 30th of January. They can't consider changing anything after that.
So it seems to me that this board needs to discuss that 2.8 million fund balance. That's something we need to discuss. But apart from that, are there any questions right now for Director Gordon apart from the 2.8 million fund balance? Okay, so hearing none, I have two thoughts that come to my mind about the fund balance, and I'd like for us to have a deeper conversation about it. One option is, as Nick suggested, we simply vote to apply that to our overall spend. And please, Director Gordon, if I get some of these terms incorrect, please do correct me, because we go deep in the weeds in this, and this is your area of expertise, not mine. So if I say something, if I use the wrong terminology, please do correct me. So we have the option to vote to apply some or all of that $2.8 million to our spending. We also have to keep in mind, though, as the superintendent pointed out at our last budget meeting, that we currently have lots of support services budgeted for this year that are being paid for by outside funds. And those outside funds might not be available a year from now. And so we may have to make some difficult decisions around which of those support services to keep in place, and then how do we pay for those. So another option I see as being available is for us to vote to move that $2.8 million in the fund balance into some sort of other line item specifically earmarked for, I don't know, we can call it the stabilization of support services moving forward. Those are two thoughts that come to my mind, but I would certainly like to open the floor to hear the thoughts of other board members about what do we do with this particular piece of money.
And can we just keep it where it is and use it at a time when we're looking at an increase, when macro impacts aren't causing a reduction, but are causing an increase, and use it at that time, and largely probably driven by what you just said.
Sure. Director Gordon, can you speak to that, please?
In theory, if we were to spend every penny of our expenditure budget, that fund balance would be used up in its entirety next year. So that would go away. And the reason it has increased is because we continually are not fully expending our expenditures, and it's continuing to increase. And that's why we put the ballot article out before the voters. I think it was last year, because it's better to incrementally kind of work that fund balance down if we can, because any drastic shift is going to have a huge impact on the tax rate. So we have contingencies built into the budget. It's only $210,000. So theoretically, again, if every penny were to be spent except the contingency or fund balance next year would only be $210,000. So we have the potential to see a really big jump in our demand on the ed fund going forward as that fund balance shrinks.
So do you have a recommendation as to what this board could do with that $2.8 million fund balance?
Well, I guess I should back up and say your responsibility at this point as a board is just to set the expenditure budget. And that's what we have to put before the voters. We can run scenarios and come up with, different tax estimates, but that is only going to be an estimate until we know what the legislature is going to do with the property yield and where the other budgets are actually going to land, Mount Anthony in particular. So I was assuming, because of the sharp increase to the expenditure budget, that the board would want to try to offset that as much as possible. But you do have several new positions that are proposed here in this budget, and if they're not filled, then that's going to be an additional surplus going forward. So
the positions that are currently funded in the budget that are being paid for through ESSER funds, if those positions are not filled, do we hold on to those ESSER funds, or do those get returned?
So the ESSER monies and the positions funded through ESSER are not factored into this at all. This is strictly just your local money. The ESSER funds, so currently our ESSER 2 funds are supporting a good number of the positions that we have, and that will carry us through FY23. We anticipate moving those positions into ARP ESSER or ESSER 3, which will get us an additional year. So that'll be into FY24, 25. The funds expire September of 24. So that would be, so we'll have it through FY24.
Dick, yes, please.
Chris, you mentioned using some of the fund balance as stabilization for some of the new positions that have been added. That makes a statement to anybody who might consider this budget that we've made an attempt to cover our needs with money we already have. I think that's a good suggestion, and it doesn't. I guess I don't think that directly impacts the state support grant as much as we're worried about. I guess what I'm proposing is that if we have $2.8 million, we take $2 million out of that, pending what we need to save by law as a fund balance. What do we require, 5% or something? And that still leaves us a substantial cushion. I guess that's my thought as a non-math person.
Director Gordon, is that right? 5% is that we're required to save as part of the fund balance?
You're not required by law to have anything. I think it's just a practice that, it's preferable to be operating with a surplus from year to year as opposed to a deficit, because your deficit then is just additional expense that you've already spent, but then have to make up the ground for.
Okay. Other board members, anyone have other thoughts regarding the fund balance?
For me, I agree with Dick and with you. I think that the recommendation to put that in a line item, if it would be advantageous for us to utilize it and have that line item for something for the future. I like that idea. I think that makes sense, because I do think that we're using the ESSER funds right now and other grants for these positions, but I don't think, unfortunately, the issues that we're using these positions for are going to go away in the time that we have available. So I think we are going to still need those resources within our district. So I think that's a very good idea, in my opinion.
Cindy, please go ahead.
Yeah, I somewhat agree with Dick. My concern is maybe we don't need to be saving $2 million. If we could save the taxpayers a few more pennies in this time, day and age, I think that the taxpayers would be happy. I just don't think we need to be putting $2 million plus aside, because we might use it. And if I understand it correctly.
Suggesting.
threw that number in just really quickly. If we were to pull $2 million out, and that Woodford would be the only district with a projected tax decrease. All others would be an increase. So Bennington would go up 5 cents. Shaftesbury, no, I'm sorry, that's Pownell. Pownell would go up 3.5 cents, and Shaftesbury would be 6.5 cent increase.
Thank you for that, Renee. I was going to ask that, and it hasn't fully answered my question, but can you just go back to how reducing that impacts what?
Yeah, I'm a visual person, so I don't know if this will help, but it helps me. So as the way that this formula calculates for the general state support grant, this is essentially taking our expenditure budget and subtracting every other source of revenue that we have. So the expenditure budget is 2.64 million proposed. So 2.6, if we had no offsetting revenue, 26 million would be our demand on the education fund if we had no offsetting revenue. So any reductions to these numbers are going to increase this number and therefore increase the tax rate. So just jumping back over here again. So I just subtracted $2 million from the local revenue. So if we were to set that aside, and you can see here, this is the projected change. So this is Bennington, that's Pownell, that's Shaftesbury, and Woodford.
So my thought is that there's good reasons on both sides, and I hate to cop out and say, well, what if it was 15%? But what if it was 1.4 million? We kept 1.4 million in there. How does that impact what these towns are paying? And then also, does that potentially set us up for funding into the future some of these things that we know we're going to need to cover?
I'm sorry, Scott, you're cutting out a little bit, so I'm only catching part of it.
Most of it. Scott was saying, what if you put 1.4 million out? Like split the difference and see where things stand then.
And hopefully some towns won't see an increase. The towns won't see an increase. And we position ourselves to cover some of these things that we as a board have talked about and know are important.
I wasn't looking to hold Woodford harmless. I was just sort of thinking this makes a statement that we've pulled from funds that are sitting there to offset the demand on taxpayers.
So this is Bennington, Pownell, Shaftesbury, and Woodford with 1.4 million going into a reserve. So still increases for all except Woodford.
So Director Gordon, maybe I'm misunderstanding a major piece of this. If we choose not to move any of that $2.8 million out of the fund balance, what happens with that money?
Again, theoretically, we would use it all if we were to spend all of the money that we have in this budget. But so annually, right? Like we've had money in there for our SROs, for instance, which we haven't been able to actually secure and fill those, so that money continues to accumulate year after year because it's not being spent in the Bennington schools, but it is being spent in Pownell and Shaftesbury. The contingency money, that continues to be untouched, so that will continue to roll into a surplus. We've had vacant positions, So we have, budgeted salaries and benefits for all the positions we have. But again, if they're vacant, we don't spend that money. So if everything were to be spent, we did every capital project that everybody wanted to do, and we spent every single penny on every supply that we needed, that fund balance would disappear.
I see. So the 2.8 million will be used, and it's if we set it aside for something down the line, that's when we are then less that amount of money that we're saving, and that's okay. I understand. Thank you.
So
Thank you for
down the
increasing
road,
me.
if you had a reserve fund of say 1.5 million, and we were seeing a sharp tax increase, we could then pull money in from the reserve as an offsetting revenue to lower our demand on that ed fund as kind of a tax stabilization.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, I mean, I have to think that, because I think the point that Cindy raises is incredibly valid, that, there's been a lot of strain, period, on people's lives, and financial strain on people's lives, particularly over these last 2 years of illness and pandemic. I think we need to be aware of. And so I guess my thinking is now shifting. Instead of using a part of that 2.8 million to kind of save it up, we apply it to our expenditures now so that people can enjoy a slight reduction in their taxes, give them something of a reprieve from all of the other stressors of life right now. And then that's how we proceed with this year's budget. That's my thought, and I would welcome other thoughts, other points of view on that.
Well, if I don't hear other points of view, I would make a motion that we use
I think that's the wise course for what that's worth for me.
Say that again.
I'll
I
second
think it's
that.
the wise course to do for the reasons that have been stated this evening. To spend it, to add it to offset.
Well, I don't know if I finished the motion, but anyway, my motion would be to add, to remove $2 million from the
I'll
fund
second
balance and apply
I'll
it.
second.
And
I'll
apply it to
second.
what, Dick?
And apply it to offset the new positions. I'm not sure whether we need to specify the new positions or whether we need to call it operational expenses. I don't know the proper. Renee might be able to clarify that. I'm just intent on making a statement that we made an effort to reduce the load on taxpayers, and this is the only place we had to go, and this is an amount while we still reserve some for future need.
So, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying correctly. So there's $2.8 million right there in the fund balance. You're suggesting that we take the 0.8 and allocate that somewhere else so that the $2 million can be applied to our overall spending for this budget?
I think we have that option as a board to use it as we designate, don't we?
Yes.
Well, so as I understood, Director Gordon, if we make no changes to the budget that was sent out earlier today, we will see those tax decreases for this year across the board. But if we start to take part of that fund, that $2.8 million fund, to stash it away for something else, then we're going to start to see an increase in taxes for this year. Do I have that correct, Director Gordon?
Yes.
Okay. And so I want to make sure that I'm understanding your motion correctly, Dick. So instead of the $2.8 million on the fund balance line, you want to keep $2 million of that toward the current year, but move $0.8 million of it to next year.
A reserve fund.
A reserve fund. Thank you.
Do
Do I
we,
have-
Renee, I have just a question, maybe try to figure out do we know what those positions are? Do we have a number for the positions that we are putting forth this year that are being funded by those grants and other resources, what that annual amount is, so that we could potentially put that amount aside for maybe like 2 years of that amount aside out of that 2.8 million? Does that make sense?
Yes, and I don't have that figure, off the top of my head, but again, we will have funding for those positions through FY '24, so not just through next budget year, the year after that, so we really wouldn't see a need or demand on a local budget for those positions until FY '25. So that's 2 years, 2 budget seasons away.
Can you please pull up this year's budget, the budget we're discussing right now, and just show us what this year's tax rates would look like if we stashed away $8.8 million into a reserve fund?
Sure.
Thank you. Because I think that will be important for people to see as we vote on the motion that's on the floor. And Dick, and please tell me, did I get that correct? Am I correct in
It's close enough, Chris. You probably understand it better than I do.
So many zeros, it's easy to lose them. I know my glasses are right on top of my head. I should put them on. Okay, so $800,000. Back here.
okay, so
Bennington, Pownell, Shaftesbury, Woodford.
so if we move $800,000 of our fund balance into a reserve fund, people across the board will end up paying more taxes this year than if we don't move that $800,000 into a reserve fund. Am I understanding that correctly?
Bennington and Shaftesbury, potentially, yes, we'll see an increase if all the other factors that are on this spreadsheet remain the same. Those 2 towns would have an increase, while Pownell and Woodford would see a decrease in their taxes.
But they'll still have less of an increase than they would have had. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Well, here, if we go back to what it was without taking any of the money. So if we use the full 2.8, that's what so it's tax decreases across the board. But if we pull 800,000 out, and again, these I just want to stress that they're estimates at this point. The tax yield, remains to be set by the legislature, and of course the equalized people numbers. So these numbers too, depending upon if the data changes, they're out of our control, really. So I just want to stress that I can't guarantee that these numbers are going to be, as I have them presented. They're simply estimates at this point.
Okay, so there is a motion on the floor that's been made and then seconded, which is to move $800,000 from the fund balance and place it into a reserve fund. So any further discussion on that motion that is currently on the floor?
Could I add to that, Chris, that the minutes should reflect that the 800,000 was moved into the reserve fund, but the 2 million was used for, I don't know, budget stabilization, whatever, tax reduction, whatever. Just so it's in the minutes if people choose to read it.
Sure, I think, yeah, and if Richard would please make sure that that's reflected, I think that's important to note.
Thank you.
For sure. So first and a second, and no further discussion as far as I see. So all those in favor of the motion on the floor, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand, please.
Aye.
Aye.
So I see Dick, I see Cindy, I see Jeff, I see Scott, I see Chayla. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand and saying nay.
Nay.
Nay. I see Tammy and myself. I don't see Susan. I don't see that Susan is with us, so I'll just ask any abstentions. No. So the motion carries at a 5-2 vote. So, Director Gordon, if you could please plug that into the budget spreadsheet you're sharing with us, please, and then we can take a look at whether or not we want to vote to approve and move that budget forward. Okay, so what we're looking at right now, we've already seen where all the money is going to go, and now we're looking at the increase and decrease to the 4 towns that foot the bill for this district. That's where we're at. So I would entertain a motion to warn this budget. And actually, let me put a pause on that. Director Gordon, is there any specific language you need in a motion to move this budget forward?
It's really just approval of the expenditure budget and the amount here. So it's the 26,425,265.
So I would entertain a motion to that effect to approve the expenditure budget in the amount of 26,425,265.
So moved.
Second.
I have Chayla and Dick. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none. What's that, Dick?
No, I was just moaning about 8.37%. That's all.
Okay. Okay.
I'm just a whiner.
So apart from Dick's whining, is there any other discussion? And whining is a valid form of discourse on this board too, by the way, Dick.
Thank you.
Shame. Yes. So any further discussion? All right, hearing none. Yes.
So is
Jeff,
that
please.
keeping the SROs in there still at this point? With
Yep, at this point, yes.
unfunded in Bennington, well, they're open positions in Bennington, but they're
Right.
listed. Okay.
Yep. Yes. Yep.
I mean,
And in the
we'll just scan down
Go ahead, Jeff.
it again real quick. I'll just make sure we know what's in there. Because I think I have everything, but I just want to take a quick peek at it. You know, if Renee doesn't mind just scanning down through quickly. You know, just lay eyes on it before we approve everything.
In this version, is that what you want to see, Jeff?
Yeah, this version, you know, just kind of see what projects we have coming up. You know, what positions are we keeping? What positions are we adding?
So your salaries and benefits include the addition of a social worker, clinician at Bennell, and then moving the existing one that's split between the two. Split between Bennell and Molly. So that would move to Molly. We're adding one for Bennell. Adding a behavior interventionist for Bennell. Adding a behavior interventionist for Monument.
Okay.
Adding another guidance counselor at Bennell. Adding an LPN or a licensed practical nurse at Bennell.
Yep.
The intensive special needs specialist back in for Molly for the Learner Support Center. Putting a teacher back in Pownell to support the need at the 6th grade level for next year. Adding a reading teacher in Shaftesbury, increasing the art FTE at Molly, and adding a second secretary back into Pownell.
Okay.
So those are all new positions that would need to be filled if the budget passes.
Okay.
Did you say this was all on the website?
Yes, so this whole packet, so this along with the narratives is all combined as one PDF and is listed as draft 2. But if the board votes to approve this, I'll mark it as final and we'll get that. Actually, I think Katie has a spot on the main website that's easier to get to than drilling down through the board packets.
Thank you.
So any other discussion? I believe we have a motion on the floor from Chayla and Dick to approve the expenditure budget in the amount of the 26 million and change that specified before. Any further discussion on that motion?
Yeah,
Yeah, Cindy, please.
I don't know, I'm not comfortable with increasing 8%. That's all I want to say.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, so hearing none, all those in favor of approving the expenditure budget in the amount specified, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye.
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 All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand and saying nay.
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 Any abstentions? Okay, hearing none, the expenditure budget passes on a 5-2 margin. So, Director Gordon, what else do you need from us with regard to this budget?
We have started working on the draft warning, so we'll just have to have a special meeting at some point before January 30th for the board to review that warning, approve it, and then sign it, and we'll just have to get it to our district clerk for it to be posted per statute. So it does have to be posted between the 20th and the 30th. So once we have that ready, I can have Amy reach out and we can find a time for the board to meet.
Okay.
We did hear today that currently right now we have to have an in-person meeting the night before, the floor meeting the night before, but it's our understanding that may change in the next coming days that would allow us to have that be a fully remote the way it was last year. But at this time, we're still going to have to set it up the way this meeting is, somebody physically present at a location, and the rest can join virtually.
Okay. All right then. Well, certainly big thanks to Director Gordon for all the work. And it's been said before that, and it's worth saying again, your ability to take all this information and then to explain it to a board of lay people is always really well appreciated. So thank you very much for all the time and effort that takes. Superintendent Culkeen, our regularly scheduled board meeting will take place immediately after this. Is that the same Zoom link or a separate Zoom link?
It is the same Zoom link.
Okay, so what I in a moment, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn this meeting, and then I would propose we take about a 5-minute break before we then jump into our regular board meeting. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn this budget meeting.
Move to adjourn.
That's it.
I see Dick and Scott as a first and a second. Any discussion on adjourning? Hearing none, all those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Very good. We are adjourned, and we will resume at 6:03 p.m.